Chapter 1. The Undercity didn't just smell of rot, it smelled of failed dreams. Vesper adjusted the frayed shawl over her head, her fingers brushing the 3 ancient coins in her pocket. They felt cold, like the stones of a tomb. Every instinct told her to buy the moonspore and vanish back to her brother's bedside. He was dying, and she was his only shield. Then the auction began, and the air turned electric with a scent that shouldn't exist in this gutter. Crushed pine needles and the ozone of a coming storm. The man in the cage was a ruin of royalty, even kneeling, blood-streaked and bound by an obsidian collar that hissed with dark magic. He looked down on the crowd. His silence wasn't a sign of defeat. It was a promise of future slaughter. 10,000 gold, Lord Silas's voice cut through the air. Vesper's heart didn't just thrum. It screamed. It wasn't just the mate bond. It was the recognition of a fellow caged animal. She saw the betrayal in his stormy eyes, the look of a leader sold out by his own blood. If Silas took him, the king of Eryndor would be tortured until his soul broke. Vesper looked at the coins, meant for her brother. "Forgive me, Leo," she whispered in the hollow of her mind. "But a king owes a debt, and I need a god to save you, not a mushroom." She didn't just toss the coins. She stepped forward, eyes locking with the auctioneers. "I bid these," she announced, her voice a blade of steel amidst the whispers. The brass scales didn't just tip. They shrieked as they calculated the weight of her sacrifice. Priceless. As the obsidian collar shattered, Vesper didn't wait for him to claim her. She stepped into his space, her hand hovering near his heart. "I bought your life, king," she hissed, her voice low enough only for him to hear. "Now, you are going to help me save mine." Torin's hand clamped around her waist, his crimson eyes burning with a mix of feral hunger and shocked recognition. He didn't just say mine. He breathed it against her skin like a vow of eternal debt. Chapter 2. The alleyway was a throat of shadows, and they were sliding down it. "You hit me," Torin growled, his voice a landslide of gravel and silk. He had her pinned against the damp brick, his massive body vibrating with a restless, violent energy. No one strikes the alpha of the blood iron pack. "Then you should have stayed in your cage," Vesper shot back, her chest heaving. She didn't shrink away. She used her forearm to push against his sternum, creating a sliver of space. "I didn't buy you to be your toy. I bought you because my brother is dying of a curse only an alpha's blood or a king's favor can break." Torin paused, his head tilting. The predatory hunger in his eyes flickered, replaced by a sharp, calculating intelligence. He saw her now, not just as a mate, but as a girl who had gambled everything on a monster. "You risked your life for a dying cub?" he asked, his hand moving from the wall to trace the line of her jaw. His touch was lethal, but devastatingly steady. "I was betrayed by my own counsel, sold for silver by the men I called brothers. Trust is a dead language to me, little weaver." "Then learn to speak it again," Vesper whispered, her heart betraying her as it leaped at his touch. The sexual tension between them was a physical weight, thick as the city's fog. Torin leaned in, his lips a hair's breadth from her ear. "If I help you," he murmured, his breath scorching her skin, "the price won't be gold. It will be every breath you draw. I don't just protect what is mine. I consume it." Before she could answer, the silver arrow hissed through the dark. Torin didn't just flinch. He caught the scent of the poison before the fletching hit. He spun, shoving Vesper behind his massive frame just as the bolt buried itself in his shoulder. He didn't roar in pain. He roared in fury. "Silas!" Torin spat the name like venom, his claws beginning to unsheathe. He wants the king's head, but he'll find only the wolf's teeth. Soldiers poured into the alley, their silver armor gleaming like cold teeth. Vesper didn't wait for Torin to act. She grabbed a vial of caustic flash powder from her belt. Her own weapon, her own choice. "Don't just stand there being a martyr," Vesper yelled over the din. "Fight!" Chapter 3. The air in the alleyway turned into a soup of gray soot and stinging chemicals. Vesper didn't wait for the silver-clad soldiers to recover from her flash powder. She grabbed the back of Torin's shredded shirt, her small hand white-knuckled against his iron-hard muscle. "Move, or we both die," she hissed. Torin didn't need a second invitation. Even with a silver bolt buried in his shoulder, he moved with the terrifying speed of a landslide. He didn't shift, not yet. He remained in his human form, a titan of blood and shadow, swinging a heavy iron pipe he'd ripped from the wall like it was a toy. The sound of it meeting silver plate armor was a sickening crunch that echoed off the brick. They scrambled over a rotting fence and plunged into the darkest veins of the slums. Vesper led the way, her heart drumming a frantic, rhythmic beat. She knew these streets. She had survived them since she was 10. By the time they reached her tenement, a leaning, salt-rotted wooden structure, Torin was leaning heavily on her. The silver poison was turning his veins into black, pulsing ink beneath his skin. "Barnaby, watch the door," Vesper commanded as they crested the final flight of stairs. She shoved open the door to her attic. The room was small, smelling of dried valerian root and the sharp antiseptic scent of the tincture she brewed. Behind a thin, tattered curtain, her brother Leo's ragged breathing was the only other sound. "Lay him on the table," she whispered, her voice tight with a cold, professional focus. Torin collapsed onto the scarred oak surface, his legs overhanging the edge. He was a mountain of a man in a room built for mice. He groaned, his head lolling back as Vesper tore away the rest of his shirt. "You're surprisingly calm for a girl who just kidnapped a king," Torin rasped. His eyes were half closed, the stormy gray struggling against the encroaching red of his wolf. "I didn't kidnap you. I bought you," Vesper replied, her hand steady as she doused a needle in high-proof grain alcohol. "And I don't have the luxury of being hysterical. My brother is 5 feet away and his lungs are filling with fluid. You are my last hope, Torin. Don't you dare die on my table." She leaned over him, her forearm pressing against his chest to hold him down. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her, a searing, addictive heat that made her breath hitch. It was the bond, yes, but it was also the raw, masculine power of him. He looked up at her, his gaze sharp despite the pain. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the way she looked at his wound like a puzzle to be solved. "You're a cold one," he murmured, a ghost of a smirk touching his bloody lips. "I like that. Most females of my kind would be baring their throats in submission by now." "Then most females of your kind are fools," she snapped. She dug the forceps into the wound. Torin's body bucked. A guttural, bone-deep growl ripped from his throat, the sound of a beast being tortured. Vesper didn't flinch. She pulled the jagged silver tip out and dropped it into a metal bowl with a sharp ping. As she worked to stitch the torn muscle, her tunic grew damp with sweat, the thin fabric clinging to her skin. She reached across him for a fresh bandage, her chest brushing against his bicep. The air in the room suddenly felt twice as hot. "Your shirt," Torin whispered. His voice had changed. It was lower, vibrating with a different kind of intensity. Vesper looked down. The collar of her tunic had slipped, revealing the pale skin above her heart. There, the birthmark, A twisting knot of ancient silver runes was pulsing with a rhythmic, ethereal light, reacting to the Alpha's proximity. Torin's hand, large enough to crush her skull, shot up, but he didn't grab her throat. His thumb brushed the glowing mark with a tenderness that was more terrifying than his rage. "A soul weaver," he breathed. The silver poison seemed to recede, driven back by the sheer shock of the revelation. "I was told your line was purged. My great-grandfather burned the last Weaver temple because they were the only ones who could command the great wolves." Vesper froze, the needle trembling in her hand. "Command them? Or break them," Torin said, his eyes locking onto hers with a piercing intensity. "A Weaver doesn't just see the soul. She can reach inside and pull the wolf from the man, leaving behind nothing but a hollow shell." He sat up slowly, heedless of the half-finished stitches. He towered over her, his presence filling the tiny attic until Vesper felt like she was trapped in a cage with a hurricane. "I was betrayed by my council because I wanted to modernize our laws," he growled, his face inches from hers. "They called me weak. They sold me to Silas to ensure the old ways, the ways of blood and terror, remained. I thought I was coming here to die." He grabbed her hand, pressing her palm flat against his bare, scarred chest, right over his thundering heart. "But fate is a cruel mistress. She didn't send me a savior. She sent me a weaver. You have the power to put me back on my throne, Vesper, or you have the power to turn me into a mindless animal." Vesper looked from his desperate, burning eyes to the curtain where her brother lay, her jaw set in a line of iron. "I don't care about your throne, Torin. I care about my family. If I help you get your crown back, you give me your word, on your blood, that my brother receives the royal cure, and that you never hunt my kind again." Torin stared at her, a slow, predatory respect dawning on his face. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "I'll give you more than my word, little weaver. I'll give you a kingdom. But first, finish the stitches. I can't kill a council of traitors if I'm leaking on your floor." Chapter 4. And the silence in the attic was heavier than the shadow of the mountains. Torin's hand remained pressed against Vesper's palm, his heart beating a steady, defiant rhythm against her skin. He didn't pull away. He watched her with a gaze that stripped her bare, searching for the hidden power of her ancestors. "My people feared you for a reason," Torin said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate vibration. "A king is a force of nature, but a weaver. You are the weaver of nature itself. My ancestors didn't just burn your temples because of a grudge. They did it because they were terrified. One word from a weaver, and an alpha king becomes a loyal hound. One touch, and our souls are unraveled like old thread." Vesper felt the heat of him radiating into her cold fingers. "I don't want to unravel anyone, Torin. I just want my brother to breathe without pain." "Then we have a trade," Torin growled. He leaned closer, his scent of pine and lightning-charged air wrapping around her like a physical embrace. "The silver in my blood is slowing me down, but I am still the rightful king of Eryndor. My royal physicians possess the ether dust, the only cure for a soul cough like your brother's. I will give it to him. I will protect him, as if he were my own blood." He paused, his eyes glowing a deep, smoldering amber. "In exchange, you will walk into my capital by my side. You will use your mark to help me identify the traitors who sold me. Their souls will stench of betrayal. Only you can smell it. Help me take my throne back, Vesper, and I will ensure your kind is never hunted again. You will be the most protected woman in the realm." Barnaby poked his head through the window, his green face pale. "Protecting is all well and good, big guy, but protecting her from you is what worries me. You're a wolf. She's a weaver. That's like a fire asking a forest to be friends. Vesper ignored the hybrid. She looked at the curtain, where Leo's breathing had turned into a wet, rattling sound. Her decision was made before the bargain was even fully spoken. "I'll do it," she whispered. "But the moment my brother is safe, I want the right to leave. I won't be a bird in your royal cage." Torin's hand slid from her heart to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. It wasn't a move of aggression, but of deep, primal recognition. "You are my mate, Vesper. Whether you are a weaver or a pauper, you were made for me. I will let you have your freedom, but I suspect you'll find the world outside my arms much colder than you remember." The tension between them snapped from professional to purely, dangerously physical. Torin's gaze dropped to her lips, his pupils blowing wide. The bond was a living thing now, pulsing between them like a shared nervous system. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "I should hate you for what you are," he murmured, his breath hot against her skin. "Instead, I want to burn the world down just to see you smile." Vesper's heart thudded. For a second, she forgot about the poverty, the sickness, and the blood on her floor. She felt the pull of him, the sheer gravitational force of a king who had chosen her as his equal. Suddenly, the floorboards beneath them groaned. Torin's head snapped up, his nostrils flaring. The gentle king vanished, replaced by the apex predator in a heartbeat. He shoved Vesper behind him, his claws sliding out with a metallic shink. "They're here," he hissed. The attic door didn't just open. It exploded inward. A massive gray-furred werewolf, twice the size of a normal man, burst through the debris. It wasn't one of Silas's mercenaries. This was a member of Torin's own elite guard, his eyes glowing with a sickly, magical purple light. "The king is broken," the wolf roared, his voice distorted by madness. "And the weaver is ours. Bring her to the council. We will use her blood to bind every alpha in the north." Torin let out a sound that wasn't a growl. It was the roar of a god being insulted. As the wolf lunged, Torin didn't retreat. He met the beast head-on, his raw human strength clashing against the magical frenzy of the traitor. "Get the boy!" Torin bellowed over his shoulder as he slammed the giant wolf into the brick chimney. "Barnaby, take them to the tunnels. I'll hold them." Vesper scrambled toward the curtain, but a second shadow blocked her path. A man in hooded robes stepped out of the darkness, his hands glowing with the same purple light that infested the wolf. "Vesper," the hooded man whispered, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "The last weaver. Do you have any idea how much the council is willing to pay for your heart?" Chapter 5. The attic erupted into a nightmare of violet light and splintering wood. Torin didn't hesitate. He met the massive, shadow-infected wolf midair, their collision sounding like two boulders smashing together. Even in his human form, the Alpha King was a force of pure, concentrated violence. He drove his shoulder into the traitor's chest, pinning him against the far wall with enough force to crack the brickwork. "Barnaby, get the boy, go!" Torin roared, his muscles bulging as he held back the snapping jaws of the beast. Vesper didn't freeze. She scrambled toward the curtain, but the hooded man was faster. He moved with a sickening, fluid grace, his fingers glowing with the same corrupt purple energy that infested the wolf. "The council was right," the sorcerer hissed, his voice like dry parchment. "The weaver line is thin, but the blood still hums. You're coming with me, little bird. We have so many cages for things as precious as you." He reached for her. Vesper felt the air turn cold, a magical static raising the hair on her arms. But she wasn't a victim. She was a soul weaver who had survived the gutters of the Undercity by being faster and meaner than everyone else. She reached into her hidden bodice pocket and pulled out the 3 ancient coins. They weren't just currency, they were catalysts. As her skin touched the tarnished metal, the mark over her heart flared with a blinding, incandescent silver. "I am not," Vesper whispered, her voice suddenly echoing with the weight of 1,000 ancestors. "Your bird." She didn't run. She stepped into the sorcerer's reach and slammed the coins against his chest. A shockwave of pure white energy exploded from the point of contact. The sorcerer screamed as the silver light peeled back his purple shadows like dead skin. The force of the blast sent him hurtling backward, through the attic window and into the rainy night below. Vesper gasped, her knees buckling. The power had drained her instantly, her vision swimming with black spots. Vesper! Torin was there. He had finished the traitorous wolf. The creature now lay slumped and unconscious. The Alpha King scooped Vesper up with one arm, his other hand already grabbing the bundle that was her brother Leo, wrapped in blankets by Barnaby. "The building is surrounded," Barnaby squeaked, clutching his bag of potions. "Silas's men and the council's lapdogs are tripping over each other to get in here. Then we go through the roof," Torin commanded. He didn't wait for an answer. He kicked his way through the shattered window frame, stepping out onto the narrow, rain-slicked ledge. With Vesper tucked against his chest and Leo slung over his shoulder, he looked like a god of war defying the gravity of the slums. "Hold on," he growled into Vesper's ear. He leaped. The wind tore at them as they blurred across the rooftops. Torin ran with a tireless, predatory gait, jumping gaps that would have killed a normal man. Vesper pressed her face into the crook of his neck, the scent of pine and ozone the only thing keeping her grounded, as the world whipped by in a smear of gray and black. They didn't stop until they reached the mouth of the old tunnels, the ancient, forgotten sewers that led toward the mountain passes of Eryndor. Torin set them down in the darkness, his chest heaving, his eyes still glowing a fierce, protective crimson. He turned to Vesper, his hands framing her face. He looked at her with a mix of awe and a terrifying, hungry pride. "You used it," he whispered, "the Weaver's wrath. You protected me." "I protected my family," Vesper corrected, though her heart was hammering a rhythm that only belonged to him. "You're just part of the package now, remember?" Torin leaned in, his lips inches from hers, the tension between them tighter than a bowstring. "I remember everything, Vesper, especially the way you look when you're claiming your power." Before he could kiss her, a low, rhythmic thumping echoed from the tunnel depths. It wasn't footsteps. It was the sound of 100 hearts beating in unison. Torin pushed Vesper behind him, his body shielding her as a line of wolves emerged from the darkness. But these weren't enemies. They dropped to their knees, their heads bowed in submission. "My king," the lead wolf whispered, shifting back into a man. "The loyalists have waited. The Blood Iron Pack is ready to bleed for you." Torin stood tall, his hand finding Vesper's and squeezing tight. "Then let us give them a war. But first," he looked at Vesper, his gaze softening, "we save the boy." Chapter 6. The ancient stone of the hidden sanctuary was cold, but Vesper was burning. She lay on a bed of furs, her skin so pale it was almost translucent. The silver runes over her heart weren't just glowing now, they were fracturing. Thin lines of light, like cracked glass, spread across her chest and up her throat. Each breath she took was a ragged, wet struggle. "She used too much," Barnaby whispered, his large ears drooping in genuine grief. He had exhausted his tinctures. A human body is a clay cup, and she tried to hold a thunderstorm inside it. Her heart, It's stopping, Torin." Torin stood over her, his silhouette blocking out the torchlight. He looked like a man carved from the very mountain, shattered, yet unyielding. He had spent his life believing he was a monster, a creature of teeth and war. But looking at the girl who had bought him with her last 3 coins, he felt a terror that no silver blade could ever inflict. "Get out," Torin commanded, his voice a low, vibrating hum that made the dust on the floor dance. "But out!" Torin roared, his eyes flashing a blinding, regal gold. As the guards and Barnaby scurried into the darkness of the tunnels, Torin knelt beside Vesper. He reached out, his massive, calloused hand trembling, as he brushed a stray lock of hair from her sweat-slicked forehead. "You brave, foolish little weaver," he murmured. "You saved me, saved your brother, and now you're leaving me behind in the dark." He felt the bond thrumming between them, a frayed, dying wire. He could feel her soul slipping away, drifting into the gray void where weavers went when their light went out. There was only one way to anchor her, an ancient, forbidden bridge between their species. Torin stripped his tunic, exposing the raw strength of his scarred chest. He gathered Vesper's limp body into his arms, pulling her flush against his heat. He wanted her to feel his heart, to hear the rhythm she had bought and paid for. "Vesper," he whispered against her ear, his breath hitching, "I am going to claim you. I am going to pour my life into yours, and I will not let you go. Do you hear me? Even the gates of death will have to fight me for you." In the depths of her fever, Vesper felt a presence. It wasn't the cold shadow of the council or the sting of the flash powder. It was the scent of pine needles in a blizzard. It was the heat of a sun that refused to set. Torin. She reached out in the dark of her mind, her soul finding his. She didn't shrink away from the beast. She embraced it. She opened the gates of her spirit, inviting the wolf in. Torin felt her silent consent, a soft golden sigh in his mind. He didn't hesitate. He tilted her head back, exposing the pulsing vein in her neck. His canines lengthened, sharp and gleaming in the firelight. This wasn't the bite of a predator. It was the seal of a king. He sank his teeth into her shoulder. Vesper's back arched, a soft gasp escaping her lips. It was pain, sharp and searing, but it was immediately followed by a wave of pure liquid ecstasy. It was as if a river of molten gold was being poured directly into her veins. The Alpha's strength flooded her. She felt his memories, the betrayal of his brothers, the cold loneliness of his throne, and the moment he had looked up from his cage and seen a girl with silver eyes and a heart of iron. Torin growled deep in his throat, his hands gripping her hips as the bond locked into place. Their heartbeats synchronized. 1, 2, 3. The fractured runes on her chest began to heal, the silver light turning a warm, steady gold. The heat in her blood calmed. The gray void receded. Torin pulled back, his lips stained with a drop of her blood. He licked the wound. His saliva hummed with a healing magic that closed the puncture marks into a permanent, swirling scar. Vesper's eyes fluttered open. They were no longer just human. Flecks of gold danced within the silver. She looked up at him, her breath coming easy now, her hand rising to cup his cheek. "You're late," she whispered, a small, tired smirk touching her lips. Torin let out a choked laugh, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "I'm never letting you out of my sight again, Luna." The moment of peace lasted only seconds. A sharp thud sounded at the entrance of the sanctuary. A large, pitch-black raven fluttered onto a stone altar, a scroll bound in blood-red wax tied to its leg. Torin stood, his face hardening into a mask of ice. He tore the scroll away. "What is it?" Vesper asked, pushing herself up on the furs. She felt stronger than she ever had, sharper, more alive. "The Council of Elders," Torin spat, the paper crumbling into ash in his fist. "They've declared you a high-level abomination. They've sent the Black Guard. They aren't coming to capture you anymore, Vesper." He looked at her, his eyes burning with a promise of total war. "They're coming to execute us both. Jaila giai joan mot, lapdan yincho chuang kwoi kung, chung tasiketok han tring nai bang mot subung no kwa quien lok, long trung dan va sutoa mantuyet joy, wish fulfillment. Danib chapter bay, loi de kua vivua, a king's vow, noi dung chin, Torin va Vesper kong, conchai tron. Voi suhotro kua kachtrung tan vasukman moi kua Vesper, hotien thangve tujo Eryndor. Mot kuok joy jaunget todien ratai sanchin jien yua Torin va hoi jong truong lao. Vesper sudong quien nang soul viver che vach bo mattat kuan hunke fan boy. Tsao trao kam kshuch, huk. Hin an Vesper jong hien nangang bain kan Torin. Kong pain hu mat mon hang jau gia, man hu mat vi hoang hao, luna, nam gyuvan men kuak avuang kwok, Torin kong kai tuyen chien voi batki, I dam je duako, kang jin vi the jok ton kuako, trong longan, ket thuk, su joan tu han puch kuagiajin, Vesper va mut koi, jau moi cho vuang kwok Eryndor, kep lai bang mot koan kach langman, kang jin sugan ket vin haku, Muchtiao so tu, moting hin jen, moting hin hai tram tu. Chapter Bay. The silver gates of Eryndor did not open for them. They were shattered. Torin marched through the dust of the fallen barricades, his presence a physical weight that forced the city's air to go still. He was no longer the wounded, caged animal Vesper had bought in the Undercity. He wore black steel armor etched with the sigil of the Blood Iron Pack, and at his side, Vesper walked with her head held high, her white hair flowing like a banner of winter silk. They reached the great hall, where the Council of Elders sat atop their high stone thrones. These were the men who had sold their king for silver and plotted to bleed a girl for her soul. "Traitor!" the High Elder shrieked, pointing a withered finger at Torin. "You bring an abomination into the heart of our sanctuary. The Blackguard, seize them." A wall of armored wolves moved forward, their spears leveled. Torin didn't draw his sword. He didn't have to. He looked at Vesper, a silent command passing through the golden threads of their bond. Vesper stepped forward. She didn't feel the fear of the slums anymore. She felt the ancient roaring river of the soul weavers pulsing in her chest. She raised her hand, and the 3 tarnished coins, now glowing with a blinding celestial fire, hovered above her palm. "I see the threads," Vesper's voice echoed, sounding like a chorus of spirits. "I see the rot in your hearts." She closed her fist. The purple, corrupt magic that infested the Council's guards vanished instantly, sucked into the void of her power. The soldiers stumbled, the fog lifting from their minds as they realized who stood before them. They looked at Torin, their true king, and then at the girl who had just stripped the darkness from their souls. One by one, they lowered their spears and knelt. "The council is finished," Torin growled, his voice a thunderclap in the silent hall. He moved toward the High Elder with the slow, inevitable grace of a predator. He didn't kill him. Instead, he grabbed the Elder's silver chain of office and crushed it into dust. "You sold your soul to Silas. You betrayed your blood for greed. For that, the wilderness will be your only home. Exile or death. Choose quickly." The elders fled, their power crumbling like ash in the wind. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the throne room, the silence was broken by a small, high-pitched voice. "Vesper?" Vesper spun around. Barnaby emerged from behind a pillar, leading a small boy whose cheeks were finally flushed with color. Leo ran across the cold marble floor, his lungs clear, his laughter the sweetest sound Vesper had ever heard. "Leo!" She caught him in her arms, falling to her knees and burying her face in his hair. The royal cure had worked. The debt was paid. Torin watched them, his hard features softening into something raw and beautiful. He stepped toward them, his heavy cape sweeping the floor, and knelt beside Vesper. He placed a massive hand on Leo's head, then looked at Vesper with a gaze that promised 1,000 years of devotion. "Is the bargain fulfilled, Luna?" he asked softly. Vesper looked at the throne, then at the brother she had saved, and finally at the king who had saved her soul in return. She reached up, her fingers tracing the jagged claiming mark on her shoulder, the mark that had turned a human girl into the heart of a wolf kingdom. "No, not quite," she whispered, a mischievous spark in her silver eyes. "You still owe me for those 3 coins. They were my mother's, you know." Torin laughed, a deep, joyful sound that echoed into the rafters. He stood up, lifting both Vesper and Leo into his arms as if they weighed nothing. He walked toward the balcony that overlooked the entire city of Eryndor. The people were gathered below, thousands of wolves and humans alike waiting for a sign. Torin stepped into the light, Vesper at his side. He didn't just present a queen, he presented a revolution. "Listen to me." Torin's roar shook the very mountains. "The era of shadows is over. This is Vesper, the soul weaver. She is your Luna. She is my heart. And I swear upon the blood in my veins, anyone who dares to look at her with malice will answer to the king's teeth." The roar that came back from the crowd was deafening, a song of loyalty that had been suppressed for too long. Vesper leaned her head against Torin's armored shoulder. The cold of the Undercity was a distant memory. The scent of pine and ozone was no longer a threat. It was home. "I told you I wouldn't be a bird in a cage," she murmured, as Torin pulled her closer for a kiss that tasted of victory in moonlight. "I know," Torin whispered against her lips. "That's why I'm giving you the sky." Under the silver glow of the full moon, the king and his weaver stood together, 2 broken souls who had found a way to weave a new world out of the wreckage of the old.